Welcome to our unit on payment posting concepts. We will be using a remittance advice from Noridian Medicare Administrative Contractor for Medicare. Before we begin, we will review the entire page for the sake of clarity. You'll notice that this is from the Noridian Medicare website. You can get to this quite clearly. At the top here is the payer's information. As we move down, we see the physician information, the provider number, and the page and check information. In this particular case, it's expecting to be 2 pages long. This is not unusual for Medicare remittances. This column begins with the providing information, the service date, the place of service is here, the number of services obtained. Hopefully you can read these little pop-ups as I hit them. The procedure code, which is the CPT or HCPCS code, followed by the modifier if necessary. Modifiers here. The amount of information, the amount of money that was billed. The allowed amount, which is the Medicare reimbursement rate for the specific service billed. The amount of money applied to the deductible. The coinsurance, which is the amount of money for which the patient is responsible, generally 20% of the allowed amount. The GRPC amounts, these are reason codes and reason adjustment codes, which we'll talk about shortly, and the amount that the providers actually paid. Now, within those sections, each dark line outlines the name and information of a particular patient, right? So you'll see the word name, and this is the beneficiary, so you have the beneficiary's information here, the provider's ID, the patient responsibility, right, which we will recognize from over here in a minute, and if the claim was forwarded, where it was forwarded to. This is typical of Medigap claims, as Medigap is a supplemental insurance, which we discussed in a different section. And what you'll notice as well, hopefully this little pop-up is coming up for you, that says claim information forwarded to. When claim information is forwarded to the patient's supplemental insurer, the name of that other payer or carrier to whom the data was sent is displayed. If the beneficiary has multiple crossover companies, only one will print in this section. The following MOA message accompanies claims that have been forwarded to a supplemental insurer, etc. Hopefully all that's coming up. So you see the MOA here and the MA18 that it was discussing a moment ago. So when we're posting this information to our practice management system, first of all, we want to check, if we can, the allowed amount is populating properly, since every provider will have a different allowed amount based on their contract with commercial insurers. And different provider types have different payment allowance. You want to make sure that this is correct. So this would be the amount allowed for a physician at this date and time. In this case, our patient has met the deductible, so none of that goes to the deductible. Patient does have a little bit left over, that's the 20%. So we would post the 883, and you'll see here this note, send this to the glossary section, which I'll show you in a moment. this is the amount that we have to adjust off, okay, which again is the difference between the allowed amount and the billed amount. So you take 180 minus 44.16 and you get 135.84. So the provider is then paid the $35.33, which you see here. So we would post both this coinsurance, which goes to the secondary insurance, and the payment of $35.33. What we would then do is verify that this coinsurance amount was received from this Blue Cross carrier within 30 to 60 days, depending on the office protocols. All right, so if we move to the next one, we look for this second patient, and we see this this code, we see this billed amount, and we see there was no allowed amount. So we want to go find, because this is only a sample, this particular CO50 doesn't show up in the definitions. But we can look for MOA, as we said, the MOA1, and we can find the CO. The CO here is in the glossary, right, that says contractual obligation. Now, note that the patient may not be billed for this. This might be a good opportunity to identify with the carrier why this particular claim wasn't paid. Let's move on to one that we can actually find in this example. We would, by the way, post an adjustment of 0 and mark this as either denied or appeal. Okay. Our next patient here, we're showing a patient responsibility and previously paid of nothing. Now notice we do have two interesting things here. We have INT, which is interest, and again that pop-up should be coming up for you. And interest is generally when the insurance company has, for whatever reason, delayed payment. From the payer perspective, you want to avoid paying interest as much as possible, because this means that you have done something that took too long. If there are additional adjustments, as in it was paid improperly, for example, paid at a physician assistant rate instead of a medical doctor rate, or vice versa, then this line here would tell you what was previously paid and what the adjustments were intended to be. The late filing charge essentially tells you whether there's a reduction for filing late or if there is a penalty that includes the entire claim. There are things called timely filing limits, which we would have to account for in our payment posting. Now, in our interest, however, we have 2 cents that we need to post as interest. Now, depending on your practice management system, you'll have to figure out how to pay for this particular line item. But in most cases, you're able to add an adjustment of a 2 cents to the payment. All right, so now we've got our payment here responsible to the patient. The adjustment, again, which is the difference of the charged minus the allowed, and the payment to the provider is $36.63. So what we post here is the $36.65, which is the allowed amount plus the 2 cents interest. Okay. All right, we have another denial here, which we would have to look up and identify what the contractual obligation is. This total lets us know that we have received $71.98. Recall that this is a sample and completely made up information, so not all the numbers will jive here, but the adjustment details, if there are any, you may have an adjustment that could be a take back of $35.35, maybe withheld for overpayment on a previous claim. So you'll see that listed here as the provider adjustment. So if we should have been paid the $71.98 and they're holding back $35.33, then the check amount for this payment should be $36.63, which should total up with what we've got here. So as we're posting this, we want to make sure that our allowed amounts and our billed amounts jive, that our patient information is the same as the patients in our practice management system. You may also see non-assigned claims, which is a conversation for another time. Lastly, here is some additional information in the glossary section to help you understand why claims may or may not have been paid. Some of this is applicable to our particular remittance advice that we're looking at, and some of it isn't, but this information is always valuable to know and will help you make determinations on what should be appealed and what doesn't need to be appealed, what can just be closed or posted and forwarded on to the secondary insurance or to the patient. Thank you very much for coming to this session.